The Ruy Lopez opening with the move 3, bishop b5. This is the opening that Hikaru Nakamura used versus Arjun Erigaisi in their Armageddon game from round 9 of the 2025 Norway Chess Tournament. Now, Armageddon, again, it's basically a must-win game for White. White here gets 10 minutes versus the 7 minutes for Black, and White has to win the game. If Black draws, he gets all the points for the game. Now, Arjun, the Indian prodigy, how does he respond? Well, of course, the main moves here for Black are knight to f6, the Berlin defense, and a6, the Morpheus defense to the Ruy Lopez opening. But instead, Arjun in this game plays a completely different idea. Bishop to c5. This move is almost never seen at the highest level in this position, as White can go for a fast c3 and then d4, getting an excellent game. All right, Hikaru, he continues, c3, we have knight to f6, pressuring e4, and here again, d4 is by far the strongest and main move here for White, but instead, Hikaru, in this game, this guy, these days, just loves his sidelines, his quiet lines, and he plays a simple sideline here, d3, defending e4, maintaining all the tension in the position, but of course, White, with the move d3, he's sort of giving up on the idea of a fast d4 break in the center. All right, from here, Arjun, he castles, White goes knight bd2, a solid move, and now Arjun, he shows his hand. He breaks in the center with the very strong move d5. This has emerged as perhaps the simplest way for Black to equalize in this sort of position in the Ruy Lopez opening. What is the idea? Well, first of all, you are putting some pressure on the pawn on e4, and Black in many lines will simply take on e4, achieving a perfectly symmetrical pawn structure. Beyond that, if White takes on c6, Black just takes back with the b pawn, reinforces his center, and Black is doing perfectly fine. Now here, White has two main ideas. One is taking on d5, the other is castles. Now, if White takes on d5, Black takes back with the queen, and Black is doing fine. Instead, in the game, Hikaru, he castles, a logical move, and from here, Black, he takes on e4, we have d takes, then d takes, and then here the move a5. Now, this is a good time to slow down and talk strategy. Right here, in this position, the pawn structure is mostly symmetrical. The big factor, of course, is the open d-file. Both sides do not have a d-pawn in this position, and that means there is this tension between the queens on d1 and d8. Beyond that, the pawns on e5 and e4 they're under attack a little bit by these knights right here, and on the queen side, you know, White is the pawn on c3 and Black on a5, but overall, it's a pretty symmetrical pawn structure. All right, from here, White has a few different ways to play on the queen side. One idea is a4, trying to clamp down on the a4 square. The other idea, as Hikaru played in the game, is the move a3. Now, this kind of move is actually not that common in these Berlin defense style positions. The idea of this move, you want to go b4, gaining space and driving back this bishop. And if White can achieve that, he would have a space edge on the queen side and maybe even chances for a small but stable advantage out of the opening. All right, Arjun, he's got a lot of ways to respond. For example, rook to e8, h6, bishop d7, and so on are all playable, as is the move he played in the game. That is queen to e7. Queen e7, a very solid idea. Black likely intending rook d8 with a very good formation of the queen on e7 and the rook on d8, pressuring the queen on d1. From here, Hikaru, he knows that b4 is the idea. That is the entire idea of a3 as played in the prior move. However, if you go b4 right away, you're going to lose a pawn thanks to some very strong tactical ideas. The main line goes b4. If White does this, that is a mistake because Black takes on b4. If you take with the a pawn, you lose the rook on a1. You can't do that. So instead, if White takes on b4 with the c pawn, then again, Black simply takes on b4 like this. And again, the pawn on a3 is pinned to the rook. You can't take on b4 as then you lose the rook. So instead of that, in this position, Hikaru, he plays a simple but very strong idea. Rook b1. He slides the rook over, gets it off the a-file. Now, there are no a-file tactical ideas, and therefore b4 is now a legitimate threat. All right, Arjun, how does he want to deal with the threat? Well, once again, in this relatively symmetrical position, Black has a lot of different ideas that are all approximately equally good. For example, Black can go either knight to a7 or bishop a7, getting out of the way of the future b4 advance. That'd be one way of playing. Beyond that, moves like rook e8 or rook d8 are also playable, as is the move knight d8, as played in the game by Arjun. Now, this move right here, the knight, it's likely heading for e6, and from there, maybe even f4. And beyond that, Black can also go c6 now, driving back the Ruy Lopez style Spanish bishop on b5. All right, from here, Hikaru. b4 is the move, gaining space and driving back that bishop. Black takes on b4, white takes back, and then we have the move bishop to d6. Now, here, of course, this bishop, it can go to b6, a7, or d6. These are all playable moves. They're all decent squares for the bishop, but in the game, Arjun going bishop d6, keeping the piece nice and centralized and defending e5. All right, now, Hikaru. Bishop b2 is the move. Likely the best square for the bishop, pressuring e5, pressuring this diagonal. So, a solid move here. And Arjun, he plays the move bishop g4 here, pinning the knight on f3 to the queen on d1. But overall, I'm not the biggest fan of this move. The problem with this move, in my opinion, is the bishop. I mean, with these two knights on d2 and f3, it's not doing that much to pressure this knight. The queen can always go to, say, c2 or b3 or e2 or wherever it wants, and there's simply never any risk of getting double pawns on the king side, as white can always take on f3 with the other knight recapturing like this. All right, in the game, Hikaru, he goes h3, driving back the bishop, and Arjun goes bishop h5. Then from here, queen to b3 is played, a logical idea, getting the queen again out of the attack of the bishop, and from here, that bishop on h5, it's not really doing a whole lot for black. It's not really obvious why black went bishop g4 on the move prior. All right, from here, Arjun, he finds the best move is c6, driving back this bishop. It's very important to play this move right now instead of on the next move, as if you wait a little bit too long, sooner or later, white is going to go either rook e1 or rook d1 or rook c1, and from there, if black goes c6, then the idea of bishop f1 is possible. However, when you play this move c6 right away, like this, f1 is not available for the bishop, and that is definitely in black's favor here. All right, where should this piece go? c4, d3, and e2 are all playable in the game. Bishop e2 is chosen by white. Now here, Arjun, knight to e6 is the move, threatening knight f4, where it would be attacking the light squared bishop on e2, and from there, there's really no easy way to remove this knight from f4. Maybe one of the only ideas is g3, but that would weaken the entire king side considerably. All right, Hikaru, he sees this. How should he respond? He slides the rook over, rook to e1, likely giving the bishop a retreat square on f1 if it needs it in response to a potential future knight to f4. But Arjun, he doesn't play knight f4. Instead here, he plays a really shocking idea. He simply takes on f3 with the bishop. Bishop takes f3. What is the idea? Well, here, Arjun, he's giving up his bishop pair. After Hikaru takes back with the knight like this, Hikaru, he now has those two Bs on E2 and B2, and those two Bs are just a huge asset in this position. Modern computers show the bishop pair, aka the two Bs, are worth about half a pawn. That's where you have two bishops, and the opponent has either the bishop plus the knight or two knights like this. You know, the two Bs really are a massive asset in your position if you know how to use them correctly. All right, from here, Arjun, the move is knight to f4, surprising absolutely no one. That was part of the entire idea behind knight d8, then e6. The knight heads to the f4 square, and from here, Hikaru, he simply slides the bishop back to the f1 square. Bishop f1 is the move, and this piece on f1 is very, very important. Later in the game, Arjun, he may be threatening ideas like potentially knight takes g2 or h3 and so on. And when you have the light squared bishop on f1 defending like this, it defends g2 and h3 preemptively really, really well. All right, Arjun, bishop c7 is the move. And here, Hikaru makes a very committal decision. He decides this knight on f4, it has to be removed. It is simply too strong. And here, Hikaru, he plays the move g3, driving back this piece. Now, where is that knight going to go? In the game, knight g6 was chosen, a decent idea. Of course, there were other ways to play. For example, queen to e6, offering the queen trade is also very good, intending queen takes, then knight takes e6, getting queens off the board and therefore simplifying the overall defensive task. Instead, knight g6 chosen in the game, and from here, Hikaru, he goes a4, a very committal decision. Of course, now the pawns on a4 and b4 are a lot more vulnerable. However, the advantage here is white is ready for the b5 advance or the a5 advance, gaining space on the queen side and therefore continuing his queenside initiative. All right, Arjun, rook fd8 is chosen. Then we have a5, gaining even more space on the queen side is Hikaru. Now h6 guarding g5 is the move. And here we have rook b to c1. And finally, queen to e8. The queen slides back and potentially defends along the back rank like this. Now here, Hikaru, bishop c3 is chosen, defending these pawns, maybe intending queen b2 ideas with the little mini battery of the queen and the bishop lining up on e5. Of course, that pawn would be defended by 3 pieces, therefore Arjun would not be at risk of losing material, but it is one idea among many for Hikaru. All right, Arjun, b6 is the move, trying to break up the queen side. Then we have rook to a1, the rook slides over, then rook d to b8, the other rook slides over, and then here, Hikaru plays kind of a shocking idea, queen to a2. Hikaru stepping his queen off the b file, but onto the a file, where it's also lined up with the other black rook. Now, beyond queen to a2, white had other options, including simply queen c4 or queen c2. So why did Hikaru go queen to a2, lining up his queen with the black rooks like this? Honestly, I'm not so sure. Comment down below if you think you know the reason for this move by Hikaru. All right, here, Arjun, the move is queen to e7, getting his queen off the back rank. From here, both sides are going to start sharking around, trying to find the best way to deal with this weird tension on the queen side with these pawns and the pawns in general. All right, now, Hikaru, bishop d2 is the move, bishop d6, and then queen to c4. The queen slides up and pressures the weak pawn on c6. In response, Arjun, the move is b5, a temporary pawn sacrifice. The idea being, of course, if you take on c6, black takes on b4 and gets excellent counterplay. And that is what happens here. We have queen takes, then bishop takes, then bishop takes, and then queen takes. So the dust has sort of settled. White here, actually both sides having these passed pawns on the queen side, it's sort of going to be an all-out race between who can coordinate their pieces better and push these pawns down the board faster and more efficiently. And here, Hikaru, he says, you know what? I think I have a massive lead, and I'm going to press the lead with the very precise move a6, getting the pawn out of the attack of the queen, and therefore the passed a pawn is going to live, and now the threat could be a7 and so on. In response, Arjun, rook to a7 is the move, blockading the pawn. That pawn is a prisoner. It must be blockaded, as Aaron Nimzovich once said. All right, now rook a b1 is the move. Simply attacking the queen on b4, and the queen has to move. Queen to a3 is the move in response, and then we have rook takes b5, winning that free pawn, but of course, potentially giving up this pawn in the process. Now, right now, there is no time to take on a6, as then the rook on b8 would fall in response. Therefore, black here plays the move rook b to a8, doubling, actually tripling major pieces on the a file and attacking the pawn on a6. In response, Hikaru, rook to e3 is the move, attacking the queen with the rook lift on the third rank. Now from here, the queen goes down to the a1 square, queen to a1 is the move, and then we have rook to b6. The rook slides up and further supports the pawn on the a6 square. Now, Arjun, knight to f8 is the move. The knight potentially heading to either e6 or d7, trying to get into the action on the queen side. From here, Hikaru, king g2 is the move, getting the king off the back rank, and therefore also the bishop on f1 is no longer pinned to the king by the queen on the a1 square. From there, we have knight to e6, then queen d6, and then king to h7. Now here, Hikaru makes a very committal move. Of course, the pawn on e5 is hanging and it can be taken, but instead he finds a more attractive option. That is the move rook to b7, offering the trade of rooks here, or potentially even giving black the pawn on a6. Now, what should black be doing here? Well, it's actually not so easy to find a good response. In the game, Arjun goes knight to e8, retreating and attacking the queen on d6. In response, white simply takes on e5 like this. Then we have queen takes, knight takes, and then rook takes b7, a takes b7, and then rook to b8. Now, the dust, once again, has sort of settled, and here, Hikaru, he's up 2 pawns temporarily. Of course, one of these pawns, likely b7, may be falling in the future, and beyond that, white does have the knight and the light-squared bishop. That bishop is very, very strong, and it may give Hikaru a decent edge in the endgame. All right, from here, Bishop a6 is the move, defending a b7. Then we have knight 8 to c7, attacking the bishop. And then a key idea here, knight to c6, targeting the rook on b8. Of course, black can take on a6, then on b8. However, white is still going to have dangerous attacking ideas in that scenario. And that is what happens. We have knight takes, then knight takes, and then knight takes. And here, rook to c3, threatening rook to c8 is the idea. Black, in response, goes knight to f8. But that does nothing to slow down the idea of rook to c8, targeting both the knight on b8 and the knight on f8. Hikaru pulling away with the lead here. All right, the move is knight fd7. Black does his best to defend, but here Hikaru plays a couple of very simple but very good moves. e5, gaining space and tempting black to capture on e5. But of course, if you do that, the the knight on b8 would be hanging. In response, Arjun goes king g6, but then the simple move for white is g4, gaining space, clamping down on the king on these squares, and from there, f4 is coming, followed by, say, king f3 to e4 to d5, and so on, and white is going to be completely winning in this endgame, and for that reason, Arjun, he simply resigns on the spot to the unstoppable Hikaru in this game. Wow, what a game between Hikaru and Arjun Erigaisi in this Armageddon game from round 9 of the 2025 Norway Chess Tournament. All right, Chess YouTube, comment down below what you thought of the game. Are you guys supporting Hikaru or Arjun? I would love to know who you think is a better player and, who you enjoy watching more, Arjun or Hikaru. Beyond that, if you want to support the channel, just smash that YouTube like button. Just smash the like button. Thank you so much for doing that. And as always, I wish you the best of luck in your chess improvement journey in 2025 and beyond. And I'll see you in the next video.